when we look at measures of centre, there's 3 measures of centre you need to be aware of. So we've got our mode, which is our most common, and this is what we start with way back in primary school as the first measure you come across. So because it's the most common, we're just looking at which group is the biggest. It is the least complicated measure. So if I want to know if I've got a graph of people walking to school, busing to school, and getting a car ride to school, I'd just be looking at which is the most common method of transport for getting to school, which bar is the biggest. So this is really good. The mode is really good for qualitative data when you've got groups like bus, car, etc. The second one is our median, and this is the middle number. So you put your data in order from smallest to biggest, and you look at which one is in the middle. This is more complicated to find. Oh, I should say more complicated than the mode. So the median's more complicated, and it's not affected by outliers. So we're only interested in what number is in the middle. So it doesn't, if we've got an outlier at the top or the bottom of the data set, that is not affected by it at all. For our mean, we need to add up all our values and divide by the sample size. So this is the most complicated measure of centre that we've got, and this one is affected by outliers because I'm having to add all the values up. So because I add in all the values, if I've got a very large or very small value, then that's going to be added in. So the mean is affected by outliers. So in terms of priority, we want to use the most complicated measure if it's the right measure to use. So if I don't have outliers, if I don't have skewness, then the mean is my preferred method, my preferred measure to use. If I have got skewness or outliers, then the median is a better measure to use, and only if these two are not appropriate do we use the mode. So here's some graphs giving you an example. The first graph, the top graph there, okay, if we look at that, that's our normal distribution, and it's got one centre in the middle, and in that centre, the mode, the mean, and the median are all the same. So when you've got a symmetric distribution, like your normal distribution, they are all 3 equally valid ones to use, and the mean is the most complicated, so that is therefore the best method we use. If I have left skewed data now, however, the mode is where the top of the peak is, so the highest point. The median is the point where you've got 50% of the data above and 50% of the data below. So the median is a little bit down from the mode, but not much, and the median is a much better measure of centre than the mode is. The mean is getting pulled in the direction of the long tail. So if you've got a long tail on the left-hand side, then the mean is being pulled towards that long tail. And so because the mean is being pulled towards that tail, where the median is not affected by those outliers, the median is a much more stable measure to use for left skewed data. Similarly, but opposite, for the right skewed data, the mode is where the highest peak is, but that again, that's not the centre of the data. It's not a good measure of centre. The median is a much better measure of a centre because it's where the middle of the data really is, and the mean is being pulled towards the right-hand tail there, so that means it's not a good measure. So the median for skewed data is a much more stable measure to use. When I look at measures of spread, there's 2 measures of spread that we've introduced you girls to, our range and our interquartile range. There is a third one called standard deviation, and we cover that in year 12 and 13. So the range is looking at this distance from the biggest number through to the smallest number, whereas the interquartile range is only looking from the upper quartile to the lower quartile. So the interquartile range is looking at how spread out the middle 50% of the data is, whereas range is looking at the entire spread of the data. So our range, because that's maximum minus minimum, that's the formula, that means if I have got an outlier, a very big value or a very small value, that is going to make a big difference to my range. So my range is very strongly affected by outliers. The interquartile range, because that's finding the upper quartiles and lower quartiles and the distance between them, that is not affected by outliers at all. So that means our interquartile range is more appropriate for us to use than the range. Okay, so the interquartile range is not affected by outliers, and equally the median is not affected by outliers. So those are the most stable measures to use. The only exception is if you have got a lovely normal distribution that's symmetric, then the mean, being more complicated, is also more accurate to use as a measure of centre.